the story of the modern Middle East. For many experts, these persistent crises are born from the geopolitical inconsistencies resulting from the impossible equitable partition of Palestine by the United Nations and British mandate between the Jewish and Palestinian populations. While for Professor Guy K.B, independent commentator of prophetic books, all these recurring crises in the greater Middle East prepare humanity for the conditions of feasibility for a possible Third World War called Armageddon, centered on the city of Jerusalem and based on nuclear power. However, we are still very far from a Third World War, suggests Professor Guy K.B from the Democratic Republic of Congo, living in South Africa. He reserves the right to spread the details here, which he intends to do when publishing his future book and documentary, still in progress, entitled The Biblical Genesis of the Anti-Semitic Policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran Towards the State of Israel, elements which could be released on Amazon. For any contact, 0027712416140 and email address granmutumunene@gmail.com. A story of perpetual crisis truly begins in the aftermath of the Second World War. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a plan to partition Palestine, then under British control, into separate Arab and Jewish states. For Jewish people, many of whom were survivors of the Holocaust, this was the realization of a long-held dream, a national homeland where they could be safe. When Israel declared its independence on 14th May 1948, it was seen as a historic triumph. However, for the Arab population living there and in neighboring countries, this was the Nakba, or the catastrophe. They saw the creation of Israel as an injustice, a colonial project that displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes, turning them into refugees overnight. This fundamental disagreement over land, identity, and the right to self-determination laid the foundation for decades of conflict that would follow, a deep wound that has never been allowed to heal. The declaration of Israeli statehood was met immediately with war. Armies from neighboring Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, invaded, intending to crush the nascent country. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War was brutal and reshaped the map of the region. Israel not only survived but expanded its territory beyond the original United Nations partition plan. This initial conflict set a dangerous precedent. It was followed by a series of major wars, each leaving its own scars. The 1956 Suez Crisis, the 1967 Six-Day War, during which Israel captured the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, and the 1973 Yom Kippur War all entrenched the hostilities. These weren't just battles over territory. They were existential struggles that hardened attitudes on all sides, making compromise seem like surrender and peace a distant, almost unimaginable prospect. Each war created new realities on the ground and deepened the sense of grievance. For Israelis, victory confirmed their resolve to defend their state at all costs, fostering a powerful military and a national identity forged in siege. For Palestinians and the wider Arab world, the repeated defeats were a source of profound humiliation and anger. Palestinian refugee camps became permanent features in countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, breeding grounds for resistance movements. Groups like the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, emerged, vowing to reclaim their homeland through armed struggle. The conflict was no longer just between states, it became a deeply personal and national struggle for the Palestinian people, whose aspirations for a state of their own remained unfulfilled, a constant source of instability that would erupt time and again. Over the years, the nature of the conflict evolved, but the core issues remained stubbornly unchanged. The fate of Palestinian refugees, the status of Jerusalem, a holy city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and the Israeli settlements built on occupied land became insurmountable obstacles to peace. Even when peace treaties were signed, like the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt in 1979, they did not resolve the central Palestinian question. This unresolved tension meant that any spark could ignite a major fire. The first and second intifadas, or Palestinian uprisings, were testament to the simmering rage. Every act of violence, whether a suicide bombing or a military raid, added another layer of trauma and mistrust, ensuring that the cycle of conflict would not be easily broken and making the region a tinderbox, just waiting for the next match to be struck. That match was struck on 7th October 2023. On a day meant for Jewish celebration, the holiday of Simchat Torah, Hamas fighters launched an unprecedented and devastating surprise attack from the Gaza Strip. Using rockets, paragliders, and vehicles, they breached Israel's high-tech border fence. The militants swarmed into southern Israeli towns and military bases, unleashing a horrific massacre. They slaughtered over 1,200 Israelis, burnt families alive, and committed acts of sexual violence. It was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust, and the first time Israeli territory had been invaded since 1948. The attackers also dragged more than 250 civilians and soldiers back into Gaza as hostages. This was not just another flare-up. It was a profound trauma for Israel, shattering its sense of security and triggering a response of unparalleled ferocity. The attack was a turning point, one that would plunge the region into a new and even more destructive phase of war. Israel's response was swift and absolute. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared war on Hamas, vowing to eradicate the group and secure the release of all hostages. The stated goals quickly expanded, with Israeli officials later revealing plans for a long-term occupation and military rule over Gaza. The Israeli military unleashed a relentless bombing campaign, followed by a ground invasion. For over a year, the war has raged, reducing vast swathes of Gaza to rubble. The humanitarian cost has been catastrophic. As of mid-2025, the death toll in Gaza has surpassed 55,000, more than half of them women and children. A near-total blockade on aid has pushed the population to the brink of starvation, creating famine-like conditions that have shocked the world and led to international condemnation. The violence has been particularly intense in places like Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza, where over 1 million displaced Palestinians had sought refuge. Despite international warnings, Israeli forces launched major ground operations there in March 2025. The fighting has been fierce, turning supposed safe zones into combat areas. Aid distribution points, meant to be lifelines, have become scenes of carnage. In one harrowing incident, Israeli forces reportedly fired on crowds seeking aid, killing dozens. According to reports, these human slaughterhouses, as critics have dubbed them, have seen more than 300 people killed and thousands wounded since they began operating. The evacuation of civilians from combat zones and the seizure of land for security zones signal a strategy of permanent control, not temporary intervention. The dream of a two-state solution now seems more distant than ever before. The war in Gaza did not remain contained. It became the epicenter of a much wider regional conflict, pulling in other powerful actors who had long-standing enmities with Israel. Iran, a key supporter of Hamas, saw the war as an opportunity to challenge its rival. Hezbollah, the powerful Iran-backed militant group in Lebanon, began trading fire with Israeli forces along the northern border almost immediately, forcing tens of thousands of Israelis and Lebanese to evacuate their homes. The conflict also drew in other Iranian proxies, like the Houthis in Yemen, who disrupted global shipping with attacks on vessels in the Red Sea. The cycle of violence escalated dramatically, with targeted assassinations of high-ranking Hamas and Hezbollah commanders, some even on Iranian soil, setting the stage for a direct and terrifying confrontation between Israel and Iran. To understand the current crisis, one must look at the network of alliances that Iran has carefully cultivated over decades, often referred to as the Axis of Resistance. This is not a formal military pact, but a loose coalition of states and non-state actors, united by their opposition to Israel and the United States. At its center is Iran, which provides funding, weapons, and training to its proxies across the region. The most powerful of these is Hezbollah in Lebanon, a formidable military and political force. Hamas, the Palestinian group governing Gaza, is another key partner, as are various militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthi movement in Yemen. Through these groups, Iran can project its power and wage a shadow war against its adversaries without engaging in direct, all-out conflict, a strategy that has kept the region on a knife's edge for years. The war in Gaza, which began in October 2023, brought this shadow war out into the open. As Israel's campaign intensified, so did the actions of Iran's proxies. Hezbollah launched rockets into northern Israel, creating a volatile second front. The Houthis attacked international shipping lanes, claiming they were targeting Israeli-linked vessels in solidarity with Palestinians. These actions were designed to bog Israel down, stretch its military resources, and increase the political and economic pressure on its government and its main ally, the United States. For Iran, the conflict was a chance to demonstrate its regional influence and rally support for its cause, positioning itself as the primary defender of the Palestinian people against Israeli aggression, a narrative that resonates deeply across much of the Muslim world. Tensions reached a boiling point with a series of high-profile assassinations. Israel, in its campaign to dismantle the leadership of its enemies, targeted key figures within the Axis of Resistance. In July 2024, a strike in Tehran killed Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, a bold move deep inside Iranian territory. This followed the assassination of a senior Hezbollah commander, Fuad Shukr, in Lebanon, just hours earlier. Iran viewed these killings, along with others targeting its own IRGC commanders, as a direct declaration of war. The message from Israel was clear. No leader was safe, no matter where they hid. For Iran, failing to respond would mean a devastating loss of face and credibility among its allies, forcing its hand and pushing the two regional powers toward direct military confrontation. This simmering conflict finally erupted in the autumn of 2024. On 1st October, Iran retaliated for the assassinations by launching a barrage of missiles at Israel, a direct state-to-state attack that crossed a significant red line. Israel's war cabinet vowed a significant response, and on 26 October, Israeli warplanes struck targets inside Iran. This tit-for-tat exchange set a terrifying new precedent. After months of simmering hostilities, the situation exploded into a full-blown war in June 2025. The conflict, which began with Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear and military facilities, has now escalated into intense exchanges of missile and drone fire between the two nations. The early days of this new war have already claimed hundreds of lives in Iran and dozens in Israel, transforming the long-running shadow war into a direct and devastating regional conflict with unpredictable consequences for the entire world. The current war between Israel and Iran, which began in earnest in June 2025, is the terrifying culmination of decades of unresolved tensions. The trigger for this latest escalation was an Israeli surprise attack on Iran's nuclear and military sites, which came just a day after a deadline set by the United States for a nuclear deal had expired. The International Atomic Energy Agency had just reported Iran's non-compliance, giving Israel a window of opportunity it chose to seize. The opening strikes were devastatingly precise, assassinating top Iranian military leaders, IRGC commanders, and leading nuclear scientists. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a decapitation strike aimed at crippling Iran's leadership, a gamble to reshape the balance of power in the Middle East by force. The roots of this crisis run much deeper than any single event. They lie in the fundamental conflicts that have defined the region since 1948, the unresolved Israeli-Palestinian question, the competition for regional dominance between Iran and its rivals, and the intervention of global powers. Each war, each uprising, and each failed peace process has added another layer of bitterness and mistrust. For Palestinians, the dream of statehood has been systematically eroded by occupation, settlement expansion, and now the utter devastation of Gaza. For Israelis, the constant threat of violence has fostered a deep-seated need for security, often pursued through overwhelming military strength. For Iran and its allies, the conflict is framed as a righteous struggle against Western imperialism and Israeli occupation. These competing narratives are so powerful that they leave almost no room for empathy or compromise. This cycle of violence persists because the core issues are never truly addressed. Instead of seeking political solutions that acknowledge the rights and grievances of all parties, the focus has too often been on military containment or temporary ceasefires. The international community has frequently failed to act as an honest broker, often prioritizing its own strategic interests over the difficult work of peacemaking. This has allowed extremist factions on all sides to thrive as they feed on the despair and anger of populations who have seen no other path. As long as millions of Palestinians live without rights or a state, and as long as nations like Israel and Iran see each other as existential threats, the ingredients for conflict will always be present. Looking at the Middle East today, it is difficult to see a clear path to peace. The war between Israel and Iran is raging, Gaza lies in ruins, and the region is more polarized than ever. The human cost is staggering, measured in tens of thousands of lives lost and millions displaced. The crises keep repeating because history's ghosts have never been laid to rest. The trauma of the Nakba, the fear from the Holocaust, the humiliation of defeat, and the thirst for revenge continue to echo through the generations. Until there is a genuine effort to address the root causes, the cycle will likely continue. The future of the Middle East remains unwritten, but its present is a tragic testament to a conflict left to fester for far too long.